Get ready to be inspired by the great things happening in rural education. The Rural Scoop will bring you new ideas and innovative solutions. We'll dive into education issues and we'll highlight what's working in your rural communities. You'll hear from a variety of educators, administrators, professionals, and others who will provide relevant and engaging content in each episode. And now, serving up the scoop, here's your host, Dr. Melissa Sadorf.
Welcome back, Rural Scoop listeners. I am really excited today. I'm partnering again with Julie Duffield of the Region 15 Comprehensive Center that's run by WestEd. And we are going to be talking to some participants from our rural community of practice. And I have the honor of introducing my co-host for this mini series of reflector conversations, Julie Duffield. Julie, introduce yourself and please introduce what we're doing with our rural community of practice.
Thank you, Melissa. And Melissa, thank you for being a very active member of the Rural Community Practice. The Rural Community Practice, it started in 2020, sponsored by the Region 15 Comprehensive Center at WestEd, which is a federally funded technical assistance center, focused on building the capacity of our state agencies across Arizona, California, Nevada, and Utah. And we wanted to bring together educators and leaders from our 4 states to survey the landscape of rural education and cross-pollinate thinking across states and plant seeds of change. And so we began with facilitating conversations and recruiting members to be part of our core community of practice. And we specifically looked at representation from state education agencies, as well as local education agencies, and adding rural associations in this conversation. And looking at how you will look at different topics and understandings through the lens of rurality. And so since we've done that, we're coming to sunset 5 years later as the grant completes. We have covered over, 50 various topics from utilizing funds to well-being, especially in the pandemic. That was a big focus. Teacher recruitment and retention has been an ongoing focus of the community of practice, as well as looking at topics like how would you do with empowering rural educators to be paraprofessionals, pipeline, looking at the principal pipeline, an array of topics.
Well, and we have had people from various backgrounds joining us as guest lecturers. So that's been exciting too. Not only are we looking at things in our 4-state region, but we were also able to talk to people outside of our region. We had Bronwyn from the Department of Education in Georgia. And she was able to join us, as well as many others from NREA, the Why Rural Matters report. We had the researchers on and were able to talk with them about the data that came out of the Why Rural Matters report. It's just been a very, very rich, almost 5 years now of discussions around rurality and ensuring that the field had some tools and some insights into how to do their work better. So I'm going to start with our first reflector, and that is Jamie Welber from the Arizona Department of Education. She's joined us and has actually been one of our guest presenters on the topic of teacher induction and mentoring. And so, Jamie, I'm going to turn it over to you to introduce yourself, and then we'll get right down to the questions that we want to ask you about.
All right. Thank you, Melissa and Julie. It's great to be here today. So I'm Jamie Wilbur, and I am the Deputy Associate Superintendent and from ADE, and I oversee certification, recruitment and retention, and educator prep programs.
So just a few things.
Just a few things.
In your role and coming in as not only a guest lecturer for our community practice, but also a participant, what rural community practice experiences and topics have most resonated with you?
I think particularly in my role, Everything and anything to do with recruitment and retention has really been the topic of interest for me as well as my team, where I've had additional members of my team participate on days that I felt were really important that they attend with me or for me in some cases, as we've traveled around the state of Arizona and really tried to visit LEAs, not only, in the inner city of Phoenix, but also expanding, all the way up to Ganado and Window Rock and down to Nogales and Douglas, and just making sure that we're seeing all aspects of the state and really getting a good picture of our rural remote areas.
Then Jamie, building on that question, let's just ask, how has participating in the rural community practice extended your understanding of reality of your visits, you said, around rural communities? So insights and shifts have you had?
I think the biggest thing for us is that, my team and I all came from schools within the last couple of years. And so the experience that we all had was very much, Phoenix in the great state of Maricopa, right? So just right here. And so while we all have a diverse background in that, it was all very much in Phoenix, in the Phoenix area. So being able to take a look beyond that and really get experiences with the travel and then connecting with people not only within our own state, but outside of our state, that has been a huge experience for us and a really great learning, that eye-opening piece to really look at, it's there, but to really experience it and see it and hear it and feel it and have conversations with people. That's what's made the biggest difference. So listening in on the presentations, asking questions, taking some of those resources back, some of the toolkits and things that we've seen other people present on, and then being able to embed it within our own work. And then on top of that, going out and visiting some of those rural remote areas, that's been a key factor for us and for me particularly.
So that sense of virality that maybe you read about it, but until you see it, you may not really understand it. So to expand on that a little bit, Jamie, what specifically has your team and you been able to do with that information that has impacted how you do things at the department? What are you doing differently as a result of having those toolkits or those insights into rurality?
We always think about, this might work for this district, but what are we going to do for our smaller districts? Or what are the tools and the resources that our smaller districts are going to need? Or what's it going to look like for a district that the superintendent is also the principal, that's also the bus driver? Or if we have districts that could they partner together? Can they share resources? And what could that look like? What does the funding look like there? Or if this district can do it and do it well, how do we take what they're doing and how do we share it with another district? And so those are some of the pieces that the conversations that we've had, particularly just looking we were up in, we were up in Window Rock and we were up in Ganado doing some trainings, just the conversations that we're having with people and how do we connect them with other people, with other districts around the state that are doing things well. And some of the toolkits that we have. So we're always trying to think about how do we build relationships with people, which is key, but then how do we make sure that we hook them up, so to speak. We have those conversations with them and make sure that they've got the right people in the right seats and the right leaders with the right connectedness. So that's been a huge piece for us.
Jamie, just wrapping this up then, what sort of final thoughts would you like to share about people on the journey of as they look in your role as an SEA, doing different policies, teacher recruitment, retention? Any thoughts or recommendations?
That's a really big question, Julie.
Yeah, it is a big one. Just on a Friday afternoon.
No big deal. I think the biggest piece, particularly in the area of recruitment and retention, it's kind of been our unit's catchphrase lately, is that retention is the new recruitment. And that's really what we have built our presentations on, our practices on, our resources on, our toolkits on, is that no matter if you're a big district, a small district, a rural district, particularly in the rural remote districts, it really starts with the relationship, and it really starts at the moment that interview takes place, because people are interviewing you as much as you're interviewing them. And it's people have a choice now. There's not 100 people knocking at the door to get jobs. So they need to know that retention is important in your district, and they need to know that they're going to be taken care of. They need to know that they're going to be supported. They need to know that the right leaders are in the right role. They need to know that their voice is going to be heard. And so those are the big takeaways that I would say, no matter where you are, but I would say particularly in our rural remote areas.
Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate you being a member of the community of practice and for reflecting with us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much.
So I'm excited to have our next reflector join us, and that is a superintendent from Arizona who is a colleague of mine. Kristen Turner is the superintendent of the Paloma Elementary School District that's located in Maricopa County. And so, Kristen, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Paloma.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Kristen Turner, and I am in lucky year 13 of my superintendency for the Paloma Elementary School District. We are a rural and remote district, and we have about 120 students, including our preschoolers. We are currently almost 50% English learners, 97% Title I, and we have had a lot of changes over the last couple of years. So we have a lot of new migrant students, and we are continuing to tackle our old challenges while we also have some new challenges that are coming our way.
Wow. And I'm sure that you're doing it with style and grace, knowing you.
Thank you.
So in your role, what community of practice experiences for this rural cohort, what topics, experiences, what things have resonated with you during the last almost 5 years?
Sure. There are 3 specific topics that I really do want to address that really did resonate with me during the years of the Region 15 Rural COP. One of the items that I loved was the rural community asset mapping. I loved the focus of looking at the resources and strengths in your community to bring a holistic approach to educating students while also celebrating the community and the culture. I also really loved that it was a celebration and message of the strengths of rural communities, when so many times we focus on what rural communities don't have. This one really focused on what makes each rural community special. And I think that's so important for rural education. Another one is the breaking down barriers for students in poverty. Poverty is extremely impactful in our community, and we see how it affects student achievement, social emotional well-being, how stable the population is, and it really affects our truancy rates as well. So I have been using the poverty toolkit that I learned about in one of the sessions to address some of the challenges that we are facing this year and over the years past. And we have looked at the toolkit already this year. We're focusing on the strand 4 or area 4, which is building supportive classrooms and environments for students, hoping to make them feel safe and loved so that they want to come to school. And we're really hoping that that really helps with our attendance rates. And then, of course, the ever important rural and retention and recruitment, strategies for our schools. The teaching shortage is so impactful all across the country. And then in rural areas, you have that lack of resources that many people view from the outside, which makes it harder to entice teachers to come in. I think once you get a rural teacher, if you have the right environment, it's much easier to retain them than in a city. So I think our retention possibilities are really strong, but the recruitment can be a little more challenging. And of course, being able to attract and retain teachers also leads into the leadership pipeline or the administrator pipeline. So keeping a robust recruitment and retention strategy is so important for the long-term health of the entire school.
Thank you, Kristen. One of the goals of the community practice for the Region 15 was to cultivate a deeper understanding of rurality, especially in the state agencies in the states. And hearing, from LEAs and superintendents like yourself, so they can better understand what that means. And so one of the questions is, have you seen the understanding of rurality being expanded in our conversations by folks that you may have worked with in the State Department or others?
So yes, I would say that my own understanding of rurality has expanded. I really appreciated bringing in the state agencies because I think a lot of the state agencies work in the big city in the center of the state. And so I think hearing the myriad of stories and experiences from across so many states really helped bridge a gap that was sometimes there between the rural schools and the state education agencies. So I do believe it really helped give a broader understanding to everyone that was involved in the community of practice. And one example for me is that just the geography of the area that you live in can drastically affect an educational experience. That might be something I hadn't considered before. But even when we were bringing in high-speed internet during COVID and after COVID, your geographical location and what boundaries were around your district really impacted whether you could get the technology you needed or not. It wasn't just always a distance factor. It was, do you have mountains in the way? Do you have trees in the way? And these are things that you don't always think lead to an understanding of what a school district might face in terms of challenges. It makes you see that rural districts are different everywhere, and they have unique challenges that are not broad across all rural schools.
So, Kristen, to take that a little bit deeper, how has being part of the rural community of practice influenced your own work, your own practices as a superintendent?
I believe that it has impacted my understanding. One, it has given me access to people and experiences that are unique that I may need to call upon in the future in case we have to address a challenge that I haven't experienced before. But it's also really given me that understanding of, I know my district, but that does not mean I know your district. So to really have those open ears for conversations about a different district and what their struggles are, we may have challenges that overlap, but we may have very different challenges. And you can't always speak on behalf of all rural schools everywhere.
And then building on that, Kristen, you've mentioned about the human connection being key. And we mentioned some of the resources that were profiled, like the Poverty Toolkit. Are there anything else that comes to mind about resources, things that you can tap into or would like to continue to tap into?
I really appreciated the tool of the asset map, the community asset map. So I know that was a resource that was provided. I'm not sure where along the journey it was provided, but I like to have that community asset map for review. I would say maybe every couple of years to see what changes have happened in the community. And a lot of times in rural communities too, the person who ran this program at this center might not be there anymore. So to just keep that updated in order to bring those assets to our school.
Do you have any final thoughts that you'd like to share about being involved with the community of practice?
Yes. I want to say first, thank you so much for letting me be a part of the Region 15 community of practice, the rural community of practice. I think it has empowered me with a lot of practical resources, tools, and strategies that have a positive impact on my own school community. And I love that the collaborative nature of the group, bringing in so many different perspectives from so many different places, really fostered some great discussions. But at the heart of all of it was still that celebration of rural communities and celebrating what is wonderful and amazing about being in rural education. I love this celebratory nature, and I wish more people could see all of the amazing things that are happening in rural schools.
Thank you, Kristen.
Yeah, thank you, Kristen. And just on behalf of the Rural Community of Practice, as one of the co-facilitators, I want to really thank you for being a core member. Even though Fridays were not always your perfect time, you always gave, and you were so active and educating and learning with you and from you. So thank you.
Our next reflector is coming to us from California. Superintendent Eric Bonnickson from Placerville Unified School District is next up, and we're really looking forward to hearing about his experiences with our community of practice. So, Eric, why don't you introduce us to where you are in California and what you do there?
You bet. Thank you, Melissa. Really appreciate this opportunity. I am currently the superintendent with the Placerville School District. Placerville sits on Highway 50 east of Sacramento, kind of right in the middle of California, between Sacramento and South Lake Tahoe. We're a small school district, about 1,300 students here, and it's a great place to be. It's kind of right where gold was founded in California. So a lot of historical sites right around us here.
Well, and I appreciate you letting me know how to say it correctly. Just like in Arizona, when people say Prescott, we know they're not local. It's Prescott.
It's Prescott there. That's right.
But in your role there at Placerville, what rural community of practices experiences and topics have resonated with you in the last few years?
Well, I think a couple of the discussions that we've had with the biggest thing that I took out of this whole process was the ability to listen and learn and be able to also understand what was going on in other states outside of California. Because there are a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of differences. And I think that we want to have these opportunities to learn from each other. What's working in California could help in Arizona, could help in Utah, and vice versa. And so I think that was probably the biggest and best experience, was being able to listen and learn from the other states that we were partnered with. So overall, that was by far the best experience, I think, was doing that. But I think we had some really good discussions on teacher recruitment. I thought that was something that we had a deep dive in and really looked at what some of the different states were doing on how they were recruiting and then sustaining those teachers within their school districts so that they were becoming high quality experienced teachers for each of those small districts that they were working with. I thought that was a great discussion we had. We had some discussion on social emotional learning and how that was being approached in the different states. And was it a statewide initiative? Was it more of a district-wide initiative, and how that was going on? And so those were great discussions I thought we had. And then the last one we had just had was on community schools, and talking about and diving into how community schools were looked at differently. And one of the takeaways I had from that was your small school districts, your rural school districts in particular, have always been community schools.
Mm-hmm.
You know, those rural schools are always the hub of the community. That's where everything takes place. You know, that's where a lot of times some of those counseling services are. Some of the, the food distribution, the clothing distribution, even the medical services take place right there on the school campus and have for years. And so this idea of community schools really is what goes on in your rural school settings on a day-to-day basis. And it's something that I think that we can share with some of our urban partners, and vice versa. They can share with what they're learning and how it's impacting their center of that school district.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I'm just building on this question of how has your definition of rurality expanded being part of the rural community of practice? And I say this as the president-elect of the Small Schools District Association. You probably are often sort of expanding people's own definition of rurality.
Oh, definitely. And I mean, what a privilege it has been for the last a little over a year now to be president of the Small School District Association here in California. And I really take a lot of pride and honor in sitting in that role, and a lot of responsibility that goes along with it. Because in California, there's well over 600 school districts that are considered small. And so that is the vast majority of the school districts in California are considered small school districts. And our definition at least is 2,500 or less. So 2,500 ADA or less is what's considered a small school district here in California. But I think what is, again, going back to what I was talking about before, where my viewpoint kind of expanded, was taking a look at, again, how are those small school districts looked at and worked with in some of our neighboring states? And are they a focal point of that state, or are they kind of left to kind of be on their own and don't like to say this, but almost sometimes forgotten? And it's really those urban centers that the state kind of focuses in on. And I like to hear kind of those stories, how they're able to work with their state legislator, how they're able to work with their state Department of Education to kind of open their eyes, see the bigger picture, see what some of the great things are happening in your small school districts and your rural school districts across the state. I've got to say, I think being a small school district leader is probably one of the best jobs there is in education, because you have an impact, and you have an immediate impact in what's going on a day-to-day basis within your school district. And I think that those are things that small school districts have that are really powerful and are able to make an impact and be able to also share that impact at the state level.
Yeah, that's well said, Eric. How has, I mean, you've talked about some of the topics that resonated with you, but how has being part of the rural community practice influenced your work or what you're doing in Placerville, or for that matter, the state of California?
Oh, I think understanding that we're not alone, and that there are other districts across the state that are going through the same difficulties, having those same issues that we are, that we can work together on some of those issues, and then across state lines, that there are districts and there are counties in other states that are having those exact same issues, that are dealing with those same issues. Have it be teacher recruitment, have it be transportation issues, whatever it might be, the lack of community services, being able to, how are we getting mental health services? How are we getting counseling services for some of our extreme rural communities that sometimes don't have that built into their system or into their community? And what are some of those things that have worked? I think that has what really has expanded and allowed myself to bring those ideas back to the state of California, and then also specifically back to Placerville.
And just, Eric, building on that, are there any resources or connections that come to mind that you want to spotlight? I'm thinking of the one that Tim initially, I think, helped convene with Melissa, which was the collaboration between SSDA and the Arizona Rural Educators Association and other networks to keep looking at how rural leaders could learn with and from one another. But is there anything else that comes to mind with connections or resources?
Well, definitely that connection is extremely important. The other one is the connection directly for us with our Department of Education here in California, and helping them see and understand the very unique needs that small and rural school districts have. That sometimes I think might get lost in the bureaucracy that happens in a large state department. And so getting some of those contacts that we were able to work on through this collaborative allowed, I think, some eyes to be opened and some doors to be opened for us to be able to share those ideas and share some of those concerns that we might have that might be very different than you would see in an urban area.
Good point. And I think you mentioned advocacy being such an important piece too, so that SEA person that's potentially able to help you with some of the decisions that policymakers and influencers are talking about at the state level, that connection was huge for us in Arizona as well. So I'm glad that you mentioned that.
Oh, most definitely, yes.
What final thoughts do you have about being a member of the Region 15 community of practice here for rural schools?
I think it has been a tremendous learning experience for everybody that's been part of it. And I think we've been able to learn from each other. We've been able to gather ideas from each other. And I think it's something we don't want to lose. There's been a lot of momentum that's been built, and it's something that we want to see, I would like to see continue to have move forward for this type of an activity, so that again, across state lines, you're learning from each other and you're gathering new ideas, and you're able to continue to build and strengthen what you're doing within your small district, like we're doing here in Placerville. Just a small district, but we're able to build from things that we've learned from Arizona, from Utah, Nevada. These are things that we want to continue to build on and continue to learn from.
Thanks, Eric.
Well, thanks, Eric. That's a wrap, and I want to really thank you and for being here with your superintendent hat, as well as being here with your association for SSDA. So thank you so much.
No problem at all. I appreciate it, and thank you for this opportunity. I really, really do appreciate just the opportunity of being a part of the collaborative, but then that's this opportunity for us to be able to chat a little bit too. That's great.
So we're here with our next reflector from the Region 15 Comprehensive Center's Rural Community of Practice, and he is a colleague of mine, formerly from Arizona, and that's Dr. Quinn Kellis. Quinn, would you just do a real quick introduction of who you are, where you are now, and where you came from?
Yes, I'd be very happy to. My name is Quinn Kellis. I hail from Arizona, where the great administrators of the world gather for rural education. And I'm so very pleased to have had the opportunity to be a superintendent in a couple of different districts in Arizona, in the Madison School District, which is downtown Phoenix, and then the Dysart District, which is in the great town of Surprise, Arizona. A couple of years ago, I relocated to Utah, where I started working for the Utah State Board of Education. And with my responsibility over leadership development, have had the great privilege of joining the rural schools initiatives, both around the West and the country, but especially right here in Utah.
And Quinn, just as an aside, you've hailed from an urban background and you're doing rural work. What are some of the biggest growing points that as you've moved into that kind of leadership work that you've come across?
Some may say education is universal, no matter where you are. You have the same problems. That's not necessarily true because, yes, my first superintendency was right downtown Phoenix, right in the shadows of the high rises. And then my second stint in Surprise, Arizona was kind of out in the suburban areas, but still major housing developments, not rural. So being a part of it here, you start to realize that there are differences. And while everybody is in the same mission of educating students, the resources that you can have when you have 80,000 students and a budget for 80,000 students that can be reallocated as needs arise, you don't have that liberty when you're a district of 3 schools and 1,500 students. So just the resources, I've been thoroughly impressed with the community that exists in rural schools that you might not see in the much larger urban and suburban areas. So there's, it's kind of those give and takes, but there's definitely been a learning curve as I have transitioned into this realm.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I appreciate that now as an SEA person that's working in rural, that you recognize that there is a need to look at it differently. I thank you for that. So in your role with Utah, what has the rural community practice experience and topics that have most resonated with you? What are those things?
Probably the number one thing overall is the networking, and to be able to hear ears from other states, and whether they are an SEA person, a district or an LEA person, it's great to hear their stories and say, I know a district in my state who is experiencing that same challenge, and to be able to hear not only challenges, but solutions brought to the table from all the different perspectives has been very helpful.
And building on that question, how does you think your understanding of rurality has expanded? I was mentioning, one of the things you was a reflector often for us, and being very brave to say, well, this is how it fits into my context and what I'm thinking. And that included with the NREA Why Rural Matters and presenting it at the Utah Teachers Association or Rural Educators Association.
Right.
So would you like to expand a little bit more about, what has rurality meant for you now with that definition?
When I read the Why Rural Matters report, a lot of questions started coming to my mind. And as I would read the descriptors under each research question, I would have blanks in my understanding of why is this an important data point. For example, graduation rates, and why are our students typically graduating at higher rates in the rural areas than they are in the urban areas, and why are family incomes a point of consideration when you're looking at the two different environments. So when I presented the Why Rural Matters report during our summer Utah Rural Schools Association conference, I actually had a packed room. And there were a lot of administrators from around Utah who came. And as I would throw up the data, from the report, it showed national, but it also had Utah specific data. And it was fascinating to hear their take, their perspectives. And they would say, yeah, that's true. We experienced this. And so hearing their stories, they would give examples of what they're experiencing. They'd also have questions, and they'd look to me as the SCA representative for the state of Utah and say, what are you going to do to help us? And it's like, let me take a note on that and I'll get back to you. But it opened my mind to greater needs than what we typically perceive when we're just dealing with education in the state. You can't paint every student with the same paintbrush and expect that they have the same needs and that the resources are the same. For example, online schools, we have a statewide program, and there's a lot of rural kids who want access to high-level curriculum that is available in the large districts, but they might not have AP chemistry available in their rural community. And so if you have a whole bunch of kids who enroll in that statewide program now, that might take funding away for FTEs at that school because they only have 10 teachers total. And if 20 kids leave to go take the statewide program, are we helping them or are we hurting them? And so those types of questions that become much more complicated, but opportunities to learn and to understand.
To follow up on that, Quinn, what are you going to do about it? As an SEA, you have an opportunity to do something about it. So how has being a member of the Region 15 Comprehensive Center's Community of Practice influenced what you are doing to help these rural schools in your state?
Having an advocate at the state level for rural education is a must for every single state, because there are conversations happening with state level rules as well as in legislative statute and code. And if there isn't a voice for the rural community in those conversations, then opportunities will be missed. So, for example, going back to that online education dilemma, we were able to get legislative funding to give additional money to small schools so that they could still have the same FTEs, even though they have fewer students, because they wanted their students to be able to have access to high-level curriculum and not lose staff. And so by advocating for the rural schools' financial needs, we were in the right rooms at the right time, talking to the right people, and we could provide that voice.
So powerful.
Quinn, I think my favorite saying for the rural community of practice, it takes a village, and also it takes building these connections as well as resources. So what are some things you feel you can tap into or would like to tap into more, or what thoughts do you want to share in addition to what we've asked?
So a couple of things. One, teacher development, professional learning for administrators, opportunities to tap into some of the universities and say, do you have to have this class in person, or can you do online classes that would make it possible for teachers and administrators in the rural areas that are 2 and 3 hours away from the classroom, where they can engage in those same professional learning opportunities as people who live in town. So there are opportunities for regionalizing resources. We do have regions in Utah that are great, but I think it's probably, there's still opportunity for more, where if you have 5 or 10 districts that are very small, it's very difficult to have a good transportation department. But if you could bring all of those transportation departments under one regional transportation system, then you could pool your resources and capitalize on the combined funding. If you only have one psychologist in a region, that psychologist, hate to be that psychologist, but that psychologist could travel to different schools and provide services, whereas it might not be possible that they have any type of social work or psychological services provided to them. So when I talk about regionalizing and reaching out and inviting them through modern technologies to be able to regionalize or to gather in settings that wouldn't otherwise be possible, there's those opportunities that I look forward to.
Any other final thoughts that you'd like to share?
I would only ask that everybody keep doing this for free, because now that the funding has dried up, it was such a great experience to be able to have these gatherings. And I suppose the success would be as if we continue to gather voluntarily together, and we didn't have to have a paid structure in place, but that we took the initiative and came together as our own network. I think we should do that, because the ground has been set with such a perfect model and a structure. It would be sad to see it go away.
Well, I actually second that, because I think the success of sustainability of a community practice is you know who to reach out to, and then you can take it to the next level to build on it. And I do think what I found uniquely wonderful and challenging was that we were a very diverse group, and that was our strength over states and over roles. And Quinn, you happen to have had both roles, so it's like you've had that superintendent vision and then the SEA, and then joined to, as you were sharing, to expand it to the sense of rurality. So I really thank you, and that is my wish that it continues, and we have resources that people can build on, and here to support that. So thank you so much.
Thank you both for your leadership in this project.
Thanks, Quinn.
Thank you, Quinn.
We have another reflector that's joining us that's been a long time partner with the Rural Community of Practice, and that is our friend from the State Department in Nevada. And so, Ferdinand, would you please introduce yourself, talk a little bit about where you work and what you do in your role at the Nevada State Department of Education?
Well, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. My role is at the Nevada Department of Education. I am the education program professional for Indian education. And I've been in this role for upcoming 18 years on October 2nd. And it's evolved. And the work that we've been able to do over the past at the beginning of the pandemic, when we had no idea what next steps were, the rural COP came about, and I was able to, join forces with colleagues from this region to be able to really look at topics that were important at that time. I think the first intent was to try to, originally gather together. And then we found out quickly that that was not going to happen. So, I think the group decided that they really wanted to be together. And so the staff at Region 15 really stepped it up and started creating a pathway for us in filling our toolboxes with resources that were important for the subpopulation that of students that I really oversee are the American Indian students. And our tribes in Nevada live in very rural locations. And so, looking at teacher shortage, looking at all the things that were a norm to us that actually became big obstacles for the entire nation. And, we're like, well, those are already existing in our world. we already don't have enough teachers. We don't have qualified teachers. Our students are, they're dropping out. The chronic absenteeism has always been there. All of the topics that we visited throughout this time with each other what were already happening in these rural locations, especially where our tribal students, a majority of our tribal students go to school. So I think my role in my experience with this COP has really been to provide information to our principals, to our teachers who are in those locations. It's been an amazing time. I'm sad that it's ending, but we were able to present from a Native perspective in a couple of these presentations, and we're able to contribute to the conversation and the discussion because, again, this is where our students reside.
Is there anything, Ferdina, as far as those topics that you mentioned that really resonated with you and your staff?
I think grow your own. And how do we do that? We have some amazing paraprofessionals that work in some of these schools. And so how, they're to take that topic and to be able to think about how, one of the schools, we have about 5 schools that are very rural locations that are probably about 90% American Indian. So it's often very hard to get teachers out there. And so knowing that there's a little bit of these individuals hold a gem. They live, they reside, they breathe, this is their land, this is where they're from. They're very dedicated to those locations, tribally, culturally affiliated to this place. So how do we build upon that? So those were one of the topics that really resonated with me. And we were able to, from those conversations to become a little bit more knowledgeable. Because before the rural COP, we would think about it, but we really didn't have resources, personally made, in how to help and provide technical assistance to our, districts, our teachers or our administrators in those rural locations to start those conversations. So those conversations actually started to occur because funding became a part of all of this. And we were able to try to bring, working through one of the universities in our state. They've reached out. They've been able to try to elevate those parapros or educators in those schools where they're most needed, so that they're going to stay. They're going to be there. They're invested. So I think that was one of the topics that really resonated with me.
Thank you, Ferdina. And just how is, we talked a lot about the focus of the rural community practice was on this sense of rurality. How has your sense of rurality expanded being part of the community practice across the 4 states?
I think being able to hear the landscape of California, Arizona, Utah, and Nevada, and to see how different we are and what rural means to all of us. In California, we heard about the migrant population and those areas where there's just not enough resources. In Arizona, we heard from our colleagues there who are teaching in very rural tribal locations like the Navajo Indian Reservation. In Utah, we heard, the situations that arose there. So I think just hearing the difference and the similarities in all of the work that we do, because the majority of our Department of Eds are not in rural locations. So we were having to, look at what that looked like. Nevada, we have two large locations. We have, Las Vegas and Reno, and the rest of Nevada is rural. So, and we're a pretty big state. So it's interesting to see the dynamics that existed between all of our states and the similarities, differences.
Thanks.
So for Dina, how has being part of the rural COP influenced you specifically, your work and your practice at your SEA?
I think being more informed of what our districts and our principals, administrators, teachers need in our students, and how we can connect the tribal piece with our districts, and how can we could be a part of the work that needs to be done for our students. So I think being a part of this rural COP it was helpful because of the resources that were available, and they were all in one location. So if I needed something, I knew I could go to this Padlet and be able to download an article to maybe provide to one of my principals who is at a 90%, 100% American Indian location on a public, on our Indian reservation in a public school. So, it also allowed me to think about the parents and the students and how, the resources are limited opposed to in a big city. Or a town like Carson City. So, it's I think being a part of this rural COP has influenced my work and the practice that I do by being more informed.
Thank you, Fredina. And just what final thoughts do you want to share as we wrap up? And want to thank you for being such a core, ongoing member of the community practice and sharing and adding so much to our conversations. So any final thoughts?
Well, I really appreciated having Julie and the team to be able to lead us in a lot of this conversation. And I know it was often really hard because, trying to get an hour and a half of information into, to all of us, and the hard work that went into providing and gathering and then providing all of the information to us. And sometimes, especially when, the pandemic was eased up, the work continued, but we also got very busy. But knowing that we could rely on the information that had been presented to go back to review, to reflect, and to continue giving this information out. So thank you for being our fearless leader, Julie, along with the other colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Fredina. I take the village, as I say, everyone coming together and to create together. And thank you for being part of that rural community of practice village as a community. So that's a wrap, I feel. Melissa, any final words and thoughts?
Oh, thank you, Fredina. It was a wonderful opportunity to meet you from just a state away, and things that we have in common and things that we can assist each other with as far as challenges and barriers that we all face. So it was a pleasure being able to work with you these last 5 years in the community of practice.
Well, thank you both. Have a good rest of the day.
Bye. Hello, everyone. This is Julie Duffield. I'm here as part of the Rural Community of Practice that's been sponsored by Region 15. And out of our Rural Community of Practice, we've been so great. We've been so excited to have Marie Cardwell be part of that. And Marie, can you say a little bit about who you are and introduce yourself, about your role and which location you currently are at?
Sure. So as Julie mentioned, my name is Marie Caldwell, and I'm currently sitting as superintendent for Siskiyou Union High School District, which is a very small rural high school district in far northern California, about 45 minutes south of the Oregon border. Sits right at the base of Mount Shasta. For the last 4 years, I've been the executive director of Siskiyou Works, which is a small rural collaborative nonprofit that links education to industry. We have primarily supported K-12, community college, and industry partners to improve community, workforce, and economy in our far northern rural communities. And I have been blessed to be part of the last few years of the rural WestEd Rural Collaborative, and have had an opportunity to not only present several seminars or several meetings, but also participate in quite a few meetings.
So thanks, Marie. And the first question I have, in your role, what rural community of practice experience or topics have resonated for you? You mentioned that you've presented and then you've also attended. So can you share a little bit about what experiences, topics have resonated for you during our journey with the rural community of practice?
Sure. So I have presented on workforce, career technical ed, K-12, how important community-based organizations and partnerships are for our K-12 administrators, and particularly because we are so thin on the ground with human resources that it's important to co-opt other folks who are doing similar work and can help us do our work. And so for me, what has resonated, one, is that interchange between practitioners, both at the time, me as a community-based organization practitioner and other K-12 administrators or leaders across our Western United States. So that's one that's really resonated. I have always felt, and this process has reinforced for me, that leader-to-leader collaboration and sharing is really important. It's probably one of the best ways that we learn. And as educators, we don't want to invent anything new. We just want to steal from other people who've invented really cool things. So I think the function of these meetings have provided that opportunity to learn best practice and to share best practice. So other elements that have really resonated with me are the teacher induction and mentoring, administrative recruitment and succession planning, also developing innovative and unique ways to expand and improve our teacher workforce and our educator workforce. Braiding funds for teachers and for districts. That was another piece. Of course, a lot of this I lean into because I believe deeply in it, but it also has helped support me both individually, our organization, and the K-12s that I support.
So Marie, you have such a rich background in rural education, and you've done so much in California and beyond. But how has the community of practice expanded your understanding of rurality? In what ways?
Well, I have to tell you, being in California, we think we are the center of the world, just so you know. And so often, I think in California, we get into this mode that, especially in far northern California, that we are it for rural. And so one way in which it's expanded is really recognizing how rural really the whole West is. We have some very large urban centers, but beyond that, we are mostly rural. So that's one. It has tapped me into resources across the Western United States, in Arizona and Nevada, that I wasn't aware of before. So I've been able to lean in and leverage some of those resources and connections that this organization and convenings have provided me to further what we're doing in far northern California, and again, seek out those best practices. I think the other piece that I was aware of, but this process has really helped me to drill down on is how often, even though there are urban or suburban districts that exist and they're very large, often those urban and suburban districts have pockets of very rural that are linked to their districts, either officially or unofficially as feeder patterns. And so I think it begs the question and really impresses upon us as rural leaders who take pride, right? Look, I'm even wearing, I love rural. There you go. I love rural, right? Who often take it as our cape that we are rural and we promote rural, to recognize that rural has there's a wide definition of that. And just because you might automatically assume that somebody is an urban or a suburban district, it doesn't mean that they don't have rural components. Or the other piece, and this is not only that I learned in this meeting, but also in our wider national partnership with the Partners for Rural Impact, is how beneficial it is for urban and rural to connect and leverage that partnership process. So,
well, thank you, Marie. And I'm just building on that. How has part of the rural community practice affected your work and your practice? Has it been over the 4 years you sort of shared a little bit about the networking and seeing a wider definition and an understanding that rurality is not, it has wide definitions. Can you expand a little bit about how it may have influenced your practice being part of the rural community of practice?
Sure. So the one element I feel that Julie, you and Melissa have done so well throughout this series of 48 seminars is to bring in a really wide network of resources and project and program planning. So I felt that at each time I entered one of the convenings, I knew I was going to come away with some really important element or one piece of a program that I could turn around and immediately implement, or to either support or directly in a K-12 that we are contracted with. So that's one element I think that's been really important. The other is just elevating for me areas that I hadn't considered as key pain points for districts or key program challenges. So not only did you elevate those pain points, but then provided good series of solutions for those pain points that I could then turn around and then support, districts that I was working with.
So you had mentioned some of those resources. Do you have any specifically that have been helpful to you?
So I would think that one of the really key elements, and it came through this, and I have to tell you, I can't remember if it was directly as a meeting or just tagged because someone was in the meeting and then I was able to source additional, was the National Indigenous Teacher Project. So that's those organizations that are working across the rural West and in the central part of the state, and I think up even into Michigan. Somehow we had some Michigan folks in there that are working around Indigenous teacher pathways. One of the huge challenges that rural areas have is they consider themselves predominantly white or lacking diversity, but when you drill down into the numbers, oftentimes there's much larger pockets, certainly in rural, it might be in community pockets that are far flung, but large pockets of very diverse community and students and families that you might not recognize. Like I'm going to give you an example. In Wairika, people say, well, we're so white. We don't really have a lot of diversity. And then it's shocking when I say, well, we're actually nearly 20% Native American, or we're 16% Hispanic. And people are like, what? Huh? And they don't realize that we actually do have quite a bit. And then when you compare that number with how many Hispanic teachers or Indigenous teachers or Black teachers that we have teaching, you really can see the disparity between, what our students look like and what they see at home versus what they see at school. And when you have that disparity, it's a gap that is very hard to overcome. So, kids want to see their teachers, they want to see themselves in their teachers. Like we hope for them to be successful, they've got to be able to see that somewhere in the system. And when they can't see it at all, and it all looks like that's not me, they then are given permission to excuse themselves from the system, and as do their families, especially if there's any historical trauma around education. So I think that was one huge resource that helped in our own process here in our far northern California.
Yeah.
Thank you, Marie. Yeah, that diversity of the workforce and the importance of having all voices at the table, and looking at, we've made an effort to work with our Indigenous rural community of practice to co-share those insights. So anything final as we end up? I want to thank you for being a member. And are there any final words you'd like to add to this short reflection?
Well, I just hope that these types of convenings continue. They are powerful, and I think I've certainly turned around resources that I've received through this series of convenings. And the other thing I really loved is that they were recorded, and you always were really great about sending the resources and the summary out afterwards. So sometimes, a lot of times, I couldn't actually make the event, but I was able to watch the recording later, or source the resources, or reach out to you all at a later date to say, hey, can you give me more about this or that? And that was also very helpful.
Well, that's a wrap. And Melissa, any final words as the rural scoop interviewer here?
No, thank you, Marie. It was a pleasure having you involved in the community practice. I learned from you as well. You led some of our sessions. Right. And so really appreciate everything that you brought to the table. And your learnings became our learnings as well. So I think we are stronger together for sure when we're able to help each other out in our rural communities.
Well, I like that. Now, so it's a wrap. Stronger together.
Stronger together.
Thank you so much for listening to The Rural Scoop. Please be sure to rate, review, and subscribe, or even leave us a comment. And be sure to follow on Twitter at Dr. Sadorf. That's Dr_SADORF, so that you never miss a new release. You can also check out previous episodes of The Scoop wherever you get your podcasts. Production support for The Rural Scoop is provided by Chattanooga Podcast Studios. Find out more at ChattanoogaPodcastStudios.com. See you next time for more great discussions about rural education.